It's the Real Estate Podcast, brought to you by ANZ Home Loans for financial well-beings.
Yes, it is the Real Estate Breakfast, your daily pulse on the Australian property market from Mooloolaba on the Sunshine Coast, which is a fantastic spot, to Carlton in Melbourne, which is a little cooler at this time of the year than the Sunshine Coast. And we're talking to the sharpest minds in real estate to cut through the noise and to focus for you on what is really happening at ground level. Not sure where the working week went. It is a Friday already, July the 10th. Happy birthday to you if you're blowing out the candles. Sofia Vergara is turning 54. Still looks fantastic, doesn't she? As does Jessica Simpson, turning 46 today. And I see that it was on this day back in 1991, Boris Yeltsin, for those of you that are old enough to remember Boris, he became the first democratically elected president of Russia. And good luck back in the day if you were trying to have a drinking competition with Boris, who would literally drink you under the table. He was, when you think about it, a very happy, smiling political figure, which illustrates the stark contrast between Yeltsin and Putin. And we're off to Sydney to catch up with Michael Ferrier. He is the owner from Eyeon Property Inspections. Are you old enough, Michael, to remember Yeltsin?
Unfortunately, I'm easily old enough, Craig, to remember Boris Yeltsin.
You wouldn't want to have any drinking competitions with him, would you?
No, that's true. He had a very ruddy complexion, didn't he?
Yeah, he was a jovial character. I think that's probably the best way to describe it. Now, this morning we're going to be taking a look at building reports. It's a good one because most buyers think they're buying a property, but what you're really buying is its history as well. This is the tricky part. You know, the paperwork, the maintenance, the repairs, and decisions made years ago can completely change today's values. So what do you think the biggest hidden surprise you've uncovered that buyers just never see coming?
I think the biggest surprise that buyers often get is that the house looks like it's almost brand new, it's just been renovated and so on. But under the surface, one example that comes to mind would be a house that had been beautifully renovated, but the roof had not been touched and the roof needed to be completely replaced. And in that example, it would have cost, I think somewhere between $60,000 and $80,000. And it had completely scuppered their deal because obviously replacing a roof is a big project. And these people had fallen in love with the house, but the vendors just hadn't done the roof. And I think that, that's just one example. I think the biggest thing for people to avoid surprises is they need to follow up with the person who's inspected a house and talk it through with them. And a lot of buyers don't do that. And I think that's perhaps the most important bit of advice that I can offer to people if they're looking to buy a house.
Yes, because people often panic when they see a defect in an inspection report. But on the flip side, sometimes the bigger risk is what isn't mentioned at all, which is what you're talking about with the roof. So how do buyers separate a genuine deal breaker from something that's simply part of owning a property?
Often the answer to that is what's the financial impact? Will there be a massive cost to the buyer after they've purchased the property or a massive impact on them? Termites are an issue that come up in a lot of areas around the country. So people are very worried about that. That's a deal breaker. If there's active termite damage in a property, you shouldn't touch it. It's very hard to know how severe that damage is going to be. Structural issues in houses are obviously very important as well. Now, those issues should be identified, cracks in walls and so on. Those types of things are the things that can lead to structural problems. Other things that might be more considered to be periodic maintenance, even whether that's painting or whether that's, other sorts of sort of periodic repairs, those things are probably less likely to be deal breakers, but it's all dependent on the individual property, isn't it?
Yeah, we should talk about strata as well, because apartment buyers, they can receive hundreds of pages of strata documents, enough to do your head in, yet they still miss the one issue that really matters. Why do so many people, do you think, focus on the paperwork instead of understanding the actual financial and maintenance risks hiding inside that document?
Well, I think a lot of people are intimidated by strata, particularly the documents. Buildings can be complex, and so it's hard for people to understand, well, for one, what strata is about, but also what is actually going on in the building. This is really an area that's so important for people to get somebody to help them understand the information. There's a lot of paperwork, but sometimes people can't see the issues, partly because they're not presented clearly in a report, or secondly, because they just don't know which questions to ask. Those highlighted issues, so that could be building defects, it could be massive renovation or rectification project that's coming up or ongoing, that's going to have not just a financial impact, but an impact directly, because there'll be scaffolding up on the building for a year or two, and there'll be workmen in the apartment building every day. Those sorts of things have a massive impact on people. And so understanding strata information is really important. And again, they need to seek some help. I think a lot of people just don't ask questions. I don't know whether they don't want to appear uninformed, but it's really important to ask questions. The other thing that's really important with apartments is that there can be telltale signs, whether they've been spending money on maintenance over years, whether the levies are low, whether they've got any money in the bank. These sorts of things are really good signals for potential problems in the future.
Yeah, you talked earlier about the roof that needed doing, potentially 60 to 80K. A fresh coat of paint can distract buyers from expensive structural or maintenance issue. They look at it and they go, wonderful, look at that, a brand new paint job. Now, when I look at something like a paint job, warning bells go off with me, because I think, okay, why have they done that? What is hiding behind the paint? So after inspecting, and I'm sure that it's been thousands of properties for you, what are the most common warning signs buyers should notice before they fall in love with a home?
Yes, your point is a valid one. Obviously people want to present their property in the best light. So yes, they'll repaint it and make it look as good as they can. But yes, you hear plenty of stories of vendors covering up issues with that fresh coat of paint that you mentioned. You shouldn't judge a book by its cover is probably the best thing I can say. You need to look a bit further. And again, this is where speaking to the builder who's done an inspection on a property, who's been inside the roof, who's been up on the roof, who's been under the house, these are the signs that should help you. Now, the report itself can be a bit technical, and there are limitations in these reports because they are visual inspections. They can't go and start drilling holes into walls that have been painted, obviously. They should be experienced people. They should have that experience and that skill to look for those telltale signs that you're looking for when you see that fresh coat of paint. Please rely on those people. Ask them questions. Ask them what they think. Are there any things that stand out to them that look as if they could be a problem?
We are talking to Michael, and it's all about inspecting a property before you buy. When we come back, reading a strata report. What questions should you be asking? We'll do that next.
Every morning from 6 a.m, we bring you the latest real estate news with diverse perspectives from leading industry experts. We deliver the most property podcasts across Australia every week. Whether you're a seasoned investor or a first-time buyer, know your property with us on the Real Estate Podcast.
Well, at the moment, banks and economists are warning Australia's housing slowdown may continue into next year, with Sydney and Melbourne expected to lead with further price declines. Higher interest rates, yes. Weaker investor demand, yes. And recent tax changes. These are all weighing on the confidence element. However, while national sentiment has weakened, 2nd, mortgage brokers report that many first home buyers are still actively competing for quality properties. And property investors, what are you doing? Well, you're definitely thinking differently at the moment. Rather than focusing purely on future capital growth, many of you are reviewing cash flow, investment structures, and even commercial property opportunities that we talked about last week. It's a Real Estate Friday. Michael is here talking about these building reports. Now, Michael, many buyers assume an inspection report is the finishing line when really it's just the beginning of the conversation. What questions then should every buyer be asking after reading a building or strata report before they sign the dotted line?
Well, I think the first thing, the most important thing, particularly with strata reports, is to ask questions so that they fully understand the information that's been given to them. Often the questions they don't ask, the building might have a certain amount of money in the bank, in their capital works fund or sinking fund or reserve fund, as they're called in various states around the country. Does that mean that they're in good shape or not? No, it doesn't necessarily mean that. They need to understand, do the owners have a strategy for getting that long-term capital maintenance done? Do they have a history of doing maintenance when it's needed? Or do they defer the maintenance at every opportunity so that the levies don't go up? A lot of buyers think that low levies are good. Low levies are not necessarily good. It depends on the building and what the facilities and so on are in the building. The more facilities, the higher the levies. But often higher levies also mean that the building's being better maintained. So people need to look at this. And investors particularly might be concerned about the cash flow consequences of higher levies. But lower levies might mean future large special levies when they don't have the money to repaint the building or replace the lift or the roof. So that sort of understanding is really important. Now, there are compliance requirements that buildings have to do to get a plan done, a forecast done of that capital maintenance. And so that's a really good document, an important document for people to understand, to see whether the owners are following that or whether they're ignoring it. Depending on the state, there are different levels of requirements as to how much they need to follow that document. So that sort of information I think is really important. And this is something that strata insurance companies are starting to look at as well. And they're starting to penalise strata buildings if they have a poor history of capital maintenance, because obviously that indicates to them a potential higher risk.
Yeah, and we do often say uncertainty is more dangerous than bad news, and buyers can usually work around defects if they understand them, but unknown risks create expensive mistakes. Sometimes these mistakes can lead to life-changing mistakes. So what information do buyers most commonly overlook that ends up costing them later, in some cases big time?
Craig, I think the biggest issue is that they tend to treat the due diligence reports, whether it's a building and timber pest inspection report for a house or a strata records inspection report for an apartment. They treat it as, okay, I've got that document, I've ticked that box, okay, let's move on to the next thing, instead of understanding what the information is and what it means to them. You often hear people buy property on emotion. Often we do get people who really want to buy a property that's got issues. And it's exactly what you said before. If they can understand the issues and what it means to them, they can get their head around that. The surprises that buyers really get is when they haven't really considered the information that was available, and then they get a massive surprise further down the track when there's a big financial hit or a big disruption. But I do think understanding, making sure you've got time to speak to somebody to get feedback on that stuff is really important.
All right, a ton of great takeaways there, Michael, for everybody listening in this morning. And yeah, thanks so much for coming on to the Real Estate Breakfast. Enjoy your Friday and the upcoming weekend.
Thank you very much. And if people are looking for some additional information, they can visit our website at eyeon.com.au. We've got information for buyers and sellers on there as well that might help them.
We connect you to the best real estate information across Australia. The Real Estate Podcast.